So I applied for an internship program called, at that time, I'm not sure if it's still running, Young Canadian Leaders for a Sustainable Future. And through that, I did an internship in Washington, D.C., working with a small NGO. And so through that experience, I learned a lot about the science of climate change, the impacts that were expected, and issues of fairness. So before talking about climate change, sometimes it's important to distinguish between weather and climate. And weather just means conditions at a certain time in a certain place, so what you're experiencing right now. Whereas climate is experienced over or averaged over like a country or 30-year time period, for example. So colloquially, I guess, weather is what we get and climate is what we expect. And so climate change simply means long-term variation in those climate conditions that we expect. So overall, since the Industrial Revolution, the average temperature has increased about 0.85 degrees Celsius. But what we're seeing in Canada is that northern Canada is warming at twice the rate of the country overall. And so we're seeing most warming or more rapid warming in the poles and also over the land surfaces. Well, the climate doesn't really distinguish between what's fair or not. That is a human value judgment. Really, the impacts at a global level are sort of averaged out, but when you look more locally or regionally, then there can be differences. Climate change does cause negative impacts, but the way that we have developed contribute to exacerbating those impacts. So for example, in El Salvador, which is a very small country in Central America, they are just historically vulnerable to natural hazards. There's a bunch of volcanoes, they're in an earthquake zone, and there are settlements on volcano sides, right? And so they've cut down the trees, and now when there are heavy rainfall events, there's no vegetation there to sort of stop the flow of water, and there's flooding, and people suffer as a consequence of that. Yeah, so when I talked about the types of adaptations, I mentioned nature-based and sort of green adaptation. I think some of the most exciting adaptation solutions that we're seeing are coming out of cities. For example, in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, it's a low-lying country, sea level rise is an issue for them, and flooding, inland flooding is an issue for them. And so, for example, we're seeing water plazas, and when there's no flooding, people can play there. It's an area where you can hang out and congregate. But when there is a flood event, then that's space for the water to sit for a while. Just recognizing that we need to make space for water as opposed to try to sort of shovel it or divert it off the street as quickly as possible. And so there are some pretty exciting things going on.